All right. Hello, everybody. Welcome to episode 4. That's right, 4 episodes. Look at this thing go. Where we're going to be talking about Snare Bottom and, more importantly, the Snare Bus, which is where all the fun magic happenings. Now, you're probably wondering, all these episodes thus far have been really dry and pretty boring. All you've done is add most of the EQ and one compressor on the kick-in mic. All right, when are you going to get to the good stuff? Well, this episode is the good stuff. We're talking about Snare Bottom, but again, more importantly, Snare Bus. So, without further ado, let's jump right in because I got a lot to cover today. So, all right. So let's start with Snare Bottom. We got a Snare Bottom here, as you can see. I've soloed it up, so this is no processing right off the mic. Let me get to a spot with more snares. Okay, pretty boring, pretty bad sounding. Most Snare Bottom mics are pretty bad sounding. Now, mic position. A lot of people get that mic right up on the snares, like an inch, 2 inches away. No. I like to give it some space because that snare is just kind of harsh in general. A little bit of air in between the mic and the snare will do a good thing. So I usually am like 5 to 6 inches from the bottom of that snare. So give it a little space. That helps. So that's what you hear here. Now, right off the gate, first thing I do is I don't really need all that much low end from the bottom snare mic. So I'm going to pull up an EQ. And we'll go with the stock EQ. Okay, and I'm just going to roll off a real steep curve all the way up to like 700. Okay, here's with that. Cool. Gets rid of all that low end junk. I don't need that from the bottom snare. All this is doing is adding just a little bit of clap, if you will, like a little like clappy sound to the snare drum top. Okay. So the next thing I do is it sounds a little 1K-ish area heavy. So I'm going to goose that. Yeah, right around there. Kind of that area there. Cool, yeah. So by pulling that, it really makes that harsh snare a little more silky, which is a good thing. And then I might add a little bump at the real high-end brightness, but I want to be careful with that. You know, the thing about the Snare Bottom is it really stands out on the snare drum sound. So a little bit goes a long way. If you bring it up too much, it just sounds papery. It kind of sounds like a bad papery snare on the snare drum. Okay, so I don't need all that much. And by boosting that top end, it makes it even more apparent. So I want to be careful, but it does add a nice little sheen to it. Cool. That's all I do. Okay? That's all I do with the Snare Bottom. Now, next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to solo it with the snare top and get a good ratio in between the two. Okay? So they're kind of equal. Well, snare top is a little lower, so that's not going to sound good. But here it is. Without it. With it. Okay, so definitely add some brightness to it. All right, but this is far too much. Like I said in the last video, most of the high end that I'm getting from my snare is from the snare top, not from the snare bottom. So I'm going to bring it way down. Okay, so it's like barely in there. Like I said, that's all you need from the snare bottom. You don't need much. Now, when I compress it on the snare bus, this will pop out quite a bit more, okay? So here's with it, with the snare bottom. And here's without. With. Without. Okay, so you hear it in there. It's there a little bit. It's definitely doing something. Now, compression, like I said, will bring this out quite a bit. All right, so the next thing I'm going to do is my bus processing. Okay, this is where it gets fun. All right, so I already have it routed, but basically I'm sending both the snare top and the snare bottom out a bus I create, mono bus I created, Snare Bus. Okay, and then up top here, I have my actually snare bus track with the input, the snare bus, and then the output to the destination. Okay, so it's already routed. And you can see here it shows up in the meter. Okay, so now I'm going to process this whole bus. So again, these are the two mics together now. Okay, so I'm kind of thinking of it as the whole snare and the whole snare. Okay, not just one or the other. I've already kind of got my ratio. Now I'm just treating it as the whole snare. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do is compression. This is where the fun starts happening. Okay, so I'm going to pull up my favorite snare compressor, Impact. It's not a fancy plugin, guys. You can do this with most compressor plugins, okay? I like Impact. I don't know if I do like how it sounds, but it has a smack to it that I really like. Okay, so to get that smack, the first thing I'm going to look at is my attack. Okay, now attack time is really important, especially with snare, because it's such a fast transient. I don't want to stifle it by messing my attack time up. So usually I'm like, something like that, 17 milliseconds of attack. So that compressor's waiting 17 milliseconds before it does its thing. It's allowing the attack of the snare through, and then it's compressing. Now, once it compresses, I'm going to move over to my release, and I want a really fast release. Okay? Because I don't want this compressor to hang out. I want it to wait 17 milliseconds, compress, and get out of the way. Okay? Because what that's going to do is going to lengthen the sound of the snare. Okay? So I'm kind of shaping the way the snare is. All right? And then leave my ratio, about 4:1 is good. And then I'm going to just bring my threshold down to taste. And usually I like to get like 3 to 4 to 5 dB of compression on the hits. Okay? Okay, so if you could hear it, what it did, it definitely tightened things up and made it smack a little bit more. Okay, here's without. With. Without. With. Okay, cool. All right, so it definitely tightened things up and made it smack a little bit. Okay, and that's basically all I do with this compressor right now. Okay, the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to EQ it. Okay, so pull up my favorite stock EQ. Now, I've EQ'd the individual snare top, snare bottom, but I haven't really EQ'd them together, especially after I compress. Remember, compressors don't EQ, but they do shift the frequency. So you're going to want to kind of retweak things after compression. Okay? So one thing that pulled out for me is kind of a honk. That compression kind of, made the snare a little honky. So I'm going to cut that out. Kind of that 5K. Yeah. Okay, clean it right up. Okay, so the next thing I'm gonna do is I'm gonna give it a little bit more beef, that low end. So it's kind of similar to my snare top EQ that I did last video. Okay, I'm just kind of re-accentuating that with that compression involved now. Yeah, so right around there, that's 6 dB at 96. And let's go up a little bit, like 100 hertz. Yeah, that's great. Love that. Okay. Okay, the next thing I'm going to do is get the clack out of it, which is kind of that 1.5 area, that's going to be an important one later, or in a little bit when we add effects. Okay, that's going to make the verb have a really weird, just a really weird slap, kind of a slap. It excites the room, if you will, in a bad way. Okay, so we're going to kind of be tweaking with this guy right here when we get an effects in, and you'll see what I'm talking about. So for now, I'm going to pull it. Cool, we're getting that fat snare sound. All right. Last thing we're going to do with this EQ anyway is just give it a little brightness. Okay, and this is where I really start hearing that bottom snare. Now, I like this brightness, but I don't like the bottom snare portion of this brightness. So I'm actually going to keep this EQ the way it is. And then I'm going to bring down my snare bottom mic that's feeding into this bus, okay? Cool. Now that I've done that, I kind of hear a little bit of the woofiness, or the wong. I like to call it wong, which is right above kind of where I'm boosting here, that low beef. A lot of times when you push that out, it'll bring up kind of the tone, but it's just weirder. It's just kind of clunky sounding. It's a good term for it. It's kind of clunky, so I'm going to pull that out a little bit. So I'm at 200 hertz here. I'm just going to dip that just a little bit. Great. Okay. So that's pretty much it for my Snare Bus EQ for this one. There might be another one later. Now, the next thing that's really fun is a Transient Designer plugin. Okay, these are really, really cool plugins. They kind of do what you can pretty much achieve, or sort of achieve with compressors, but they go a little bit further. They go to that nth degree, and it allows you to really kind of customize the sound of your track. You know, if you really want to make it just slap, or you really want to make it smooth, they can do either. Okay, so on snare, it's really, really cool because I can over animate that snare. I can make it just really just unnatural in a good way. So we're super animated. Okay. So I'm going to pull up, one good one I like is by Waves. My Transient Master is what it's called. But there's a lot of companies that make them. But it's real simple. You just have your attack, your sustain. I don't even touch the gain. Okay, so this allows you to dial in attack. Do you want more or less of it? Or do you want more sustain or less sustain? Okay, so with a big, fat, gushy snare, I want that thing to last longer than it naturally does, okay? When you think of a snare, it's hit and it kind of goes away quickly. It's like thwack, and that's it. I want it to be this big without effects yet. Okay, so this is what this is going to do for me. All right, so I'm going to start with my sustain and bring that up a bit. Okay, so you can kind of see it makes it last a little longer. It lengthens the snare drum a little bit. Now, be careful with this because it will bring up bleed, as you can hear. Okay, so you kind of have to play that gray area to, you know, whatever's working best. Here's without it. Here's with. Okay, so it just kind of really animates it. It makes it larger than life in a way. All right, and then I'm going to, you know, now that I've had that sustain, it kind of, you know, my attack doesn't seem as big. So I'm going to just bump that just a little bit to get my attack back. So here's without. With. Cool. Okay. Now you're going to learn this about me. EQ is my favorite. So, I already hear that this, Transient Designer plugin, again, it's not an EQ, but it definitely brought out certain areas, certain frequencies a little differently than where I left it. So I'm going to pull up yet another EQ. The same old EQ, my stock EQ, to kind of reshape this. And I kind of hear kind of the same problem areas, that clacky. Kind of there, 1K. Okay, so I've cut, there's like this kind of, you know, all that attack that's coming through is kind of bright, kind of clicky. So I'm going to lessen it. That's right around my 5K. But I don't want to lose my high end altogether. So I'm going to go even above that, my real airy 10K, just to kind of make up for some clarity that I lost by cutting that. Then, more low end. A lot of people don't know this about snare. It's not a bright thing. It's actually a real fat. It should be real fat. That's what makes it big and hefty and not this thin little wispy, papery thing that nobody likes. And they judge your mix because it's so thin sounding. Give it some beef. It's what's for dinner. Okay, that's my tangent. All right, so now with that, that's basically all the EQ and kind of what I'm doing to this track. Now that we've added the compression and the transient design, Okay, this is where a little bit of bleed can become more of an issue or become a lot of bleed. Okay, in this situation, I don't know. I'm still on the fence, but I think it's probably a good time to add a gate. Okay, I really, really try hard to stay away from gates if I don't need to, but I think in this situation, I'm going to put a gate because we're going for a kind of pretty processed, animated, over-the-top snare. It's not like jazz or something a little more acoustic, natural sounding. This is, because of that compression, that sustain that I've added, I think the bleed is going to be an issue later. So I'm going to go back to my snare bus. All right. Now, we have to think where we want to add this gate. And I don't want to add it at the end because everything's been kind of compressed up. So you're getting a smaller difference between the hits and the bleeds that gate isn't going to do a very good job. Okay. So I want to kind of get it before my compression. So I'm going to move all my plugins down here to make room. I will make room for my gate. And that's what I'm doing. So on my first plugin slot before the compressor, I'm going to add a gate, and I'll just use the Waves C1 gate. Decent enough. Okay, I'm going to dial it in here. Okay, so I'm going to get it to where just the hits come through, and then I'll set my attack and release to make that a little more natural. So super quick attack always. You want it as fast as possible so it doesn't cut off the attack that you've worked so hard to achieve. And then I want my release, I don't know, relatively long here. Well, by relative, I mean like a half second. And then one thing that helps release out is a hold. Okay, so the hold is it'll hold the gate open once it's been opened before that release kicks in. So, instead of it just immediately tapering, it holds it and then tapers. So you can kind of keep the integrity of the back end of that snare drum a little bit better. Cool. Okay. That's pretty good for me. Now, you'll notice, and one of the many reasons I don't like gates is you hear a nice cymbal in and out with every snare hit. Okay? In a mix, are you going to hear that? No, usually not. Maybe. Okay? Then you'll have to kind of go back and tweak it and try to figure out how you're going to get rid of that cymbal bleed. Okay? So, that's where using gates can kind of get you in trouble also. They're not the end all fixer of everything bleed. They can kind of cause problems too, where it's like, all right, now it sounds like you're hitting a cymbal every time you hit a snare. Because that's kind of what it's doing. It's, it's opening in, all that bleed comes in and then it's out. Hopefully you don't hear that in the track. Overheads cover that nicely. So I don't think it'll be an issue, but it might be. So be ready. Be ready to adjust it. Always go back and adjust. All right. Okay. Whew. Snare Bus. What a beast. Let's move on to something fun, like Snare Effects. Effects. I'm I'm making like 80s horror movie sound effects. But effects. So this is where it gets fun. This is where that snare really comes to life. So let's just jump right in. So I usually add two different verbs to a snare drum. Okay, so we're going to scroll way down to the bottom of my track here, and you can see I have 2 verb buses set up, snare verb and snare verb 2, properly named. My first verb is Valhalla. Valhalla plate. If you haven't used Valhalla, you should for sure check it out. They're pretty cheap plugins, and there's a lot of good stuff in them, man. Like from big, long, gushy vocal verbs to snare verbs. A lot of good stuff in there. So this is just a drum plate, almost gated drum plate. So it has a hint of an 80s feel, but funny enough, big, fat, huge sounding worship drums kind of have an 80s thing going on, to be honest. Very similar effects. Okay. So pre-delay, somewhere between 20 and 30 milliseconds. That's the time it takes for the verb to start after the snare hits. So it's actually a little bit of a delay, but so fast that you don't hear it as a delay. Okay. It just, it makes it bigger sounding. Okay. Decay is kind of medium, 2 second. Because we're live, it's a live thing. I'll choose to be a little bit longer on this one. Because you're kind of emulating the stage or the venue or a bigger type hall venue. Okay. And then I don't even know what I did. I didn't do anything. This is just part of the preset. Sure. 76% size width. It's a little wider than normal. I don't like to go too wide because it really gets phasey weird. And then we've kind of made a little bit of a band pass on it. So it's cutting the little highs and getting the lows out of there, which is good. So that's about it. All right. So let's add this verb to this snare bus. So I'm going to pull up my bus here. Got a snare verb. Okay. Okay. Pull up my send here and turn it up. Yeah. Okay, so the first thing I notice is kind of that clackiness that excites the verb in a kind of a wrong way. You want your verb to kind of have attitude, but not be like this. I don't know. It's hard to vocalize this. You just kind of hear it. But let's see if I can isolate it out. So I'm going to go back to my last EQ of my snare bus chain because that's going to create the most influence. And I don't want to affect how all these other things are working right now. Okay. So I just want to go to the very end. No. Kind of that. It's kind of that wood knocking on a piece of wood kind of vibe here. Yeah, that helps a little bit. So we're right around that 1.5K. And I can get away with a little more low end now that I hear it. Cool. All right. So then that's basically my first verb. If you think of this as kind of like a shorter room kind of verb, because this is live and we didn't have room mics, this kind of sort of emulates it. However, when we get all the way down through overheads, I'm going to do a whole segment on generating a fake room mic. Okay, so using Verb to act like you recorded it in the studio and you had a farther room mic that was 8 feet away. Okay, when I record drums in the studio, the room mic is like a huge part of the sound of those drums. That's how they sound so big. And they don't sound sampled, they sound real, and it's just a major part of the drum sound. So live, unfortunately, we don't get that luxury. But with the amazing technology that is audio processing, we can kind of fake it. Okay? So I will do that in a live recording. I'll mock or fake a room, a stereo room mic. Okay? We'll get to that later. All right, so this kind of does that, or adds to that, rather. Okay, the next verb, scroll down here. Verb number 2 is just Pro Tools. I don't think it's stock. It's stock with HD, okay? But you can buy it without HD. It's called Revibe. I'm sorry, Revibe. And it's a bigger, more expansive space. Again, I wouldn't probably maybe do this on an album unless it's a live album. So the only reason I'm pulling up the second verb is because this is a live recording and it's only going to live as a live recording with audience and stuff like that. So I want to, I'm kind of making it seem like you're in the room, or the verb choice that I'm using is like you're in a big hall, a bigger hall with the band. Okay. But I'm not going to go quite as heavy on this verb. It's just a little extra layer of length of verb that I like to add. Okay. So snare verb 2, send a bus, separate bus. Cool. All right, so I think I could use a little bit more attack. So I'm going to pump that up on my... Yeah. Cool. Okay. That's my snare. Okay. Now, like I said, this is most of the tone of the snare. Okay. But this is also the snare soloed up. Okay, when we get overhead in our fake mock room that we'll be doing, it will really change, or it will not change, but it will really influence how that snare sounds. And it will kind of complete the overall vibe of the snare drum. Okay, so this is like 80% there. What you're hearing right now is like 80% of what the snare drum will actually sound like once we get overheads and rooms running. Okay. But it's a good start. So let me just play it with the kick and get kind of a good ratio there. So, it's not kick heavy or snare heavy. You get that good solid, kick snare relationship. Let's go to something that's not 4 on the floor. Cool. All right. Sorry, I was just fine tuning a couple little things. Like I said, always go back and tweak. As soon as you start adding new things like a snare bottom or bus processing or a transient designer or a compressor, it's going to require you to make some tweaks on the previous things because, like I said, everything influences everything else. Okay, so when I started adding verb and stuff like that, how the verb is responding to that snare. Is it clacking out weird? Is it going kind of a weird way or is it a nice even? In that case, you're pretty good. Okay, so always go back and adjust, tweak it, see if you can make it better with everything going on. Okay, cool. Hopefully that answers some questions for you or unknowns or just even a simple yet another take on a live snare drum sound. Like I said, guys, this isn't the right way. It is a way. There's lots of other good things out there, resources to follow and to look at to get a good snare sound. Okay, I'm not the only one. So like, subscribe, share, do all the things on the interwebs that you're supposed to do when you watch other people's channels. Love you long time. Star Swipe out!